Mafia boss defended elderly woman insulted by driver. What he did surprised everyone. It was a rainy afternoon in the heart of the city, the kind of cold, biting weather that made everyone rush to their destinations without a second thought. On one of the busiest streets in downtown, an elderly woman was trying to cross the road with her heavy shopping bags. She was slow, her steps faltering under the weight of the bags, but there was determination in her eyes. This was the fourth trip she'd made that week, all to buy medicine for her ailing husband. Her name was Eleanor, 74 years old, a woman who had spent her entire life in service to others. But today, her usual quiet strength was about to be tested in a way she never expected. As she struggled to make it across the street, a sleek black car pulled up at the curb, its engine purring like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The driver, a young man in his early 20s, looked down at Eleanor through the tinted window. His face was smirking, the kind of smug expression that comes with a sense of superiority. "Hey, old woman, get out of the way," he shouted, rolling down the window. His voice was loud, laced with contempt. Eleanor, startled by his harsh tone, froze for a moment. She had been accustomed to the occasional rude gesture, but this was something different. The driver honked his horn impatiently, then shouted again. "Move it. You're blocking traffic." Eleanor, trying to steady herself, took a step back, her hands trembling as she held onto her bags. But just as she was about to step aside, the young man in the car leaned out and shouted, "Move faster. You're so slow." His words were laced with mockery, and Eleanor's face turned red with humiliation. But she didn't say a word. She simply turned her back and slowly shuffled out of the way, trying to avoid any more confrontation. However, what she didn't know was that someone else was watching. From across the street, hidden in the shadows of a building, a man observed the entire scene. His name was Matteo Romano, and he was the last person you'd expect to witness something like this. Matteo was a mafia boss, known for his ruthless business dealings and cold demeanor. But today, something about the way the driver treated Eleanor hit a nerve deep within him. His hands clenched around the steering wheel of his car as he watched the elderly woman struggle. Matteo wasn't a man known for getting involved in petty disputes, but there was something about this moment that felt different. Without thinking, he opened the door to his car and stepped out. Eleanor was still trying to gather her things, unaware of the man approaching her. Matteo's footsteps were quiet, almost deliberate, as he made his way toward her. The driver, seeing the tall figure of the mafia boss approaching, froze in place. Matteo stopped just a few feet away from the young man, his gaze cold and unwavering. The driver was now sweating, his arrogance quickly turning to fear as Matteo's eyes locked onto his. "Did you just insult her?" Matteo's voice was low, dangerously calm. The driver, sensing the danger, quickly tried to recover. I was just..." Matteo didn't let him finish. "No excuses," he said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. The driver began to stutter, his bravado gone. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean it." Matteo raised his hand, silencing him. "You've embarrassed her. Now you'll make it right." Matteo's words hung in the air like a threat, and the driver knew he was no longer in control of the situation. He wasn't facing just any ordinary man. He was facing Matteo Romano, a man who didn't let insults slide, especially not when they were directed at someone weaker. The young driver quickly scrambled to apologize, but Matteo wasn't finished yet. He turned to Eleanor, who was still standing there, looking bewildered by the turn of events. "Are you okay, ma'am?" Matteo asked, his tone softer now. Eleanor, still in shock, nodded slowly. Matteo's eyes softened for a brief moment as he watched her. He wasn't used to showing kindness, but something about Eleanor's quiet dignity had struck a chord with him. Without saying another word, he turned to the driver. "You'll apologize, and then you'll walk away. No one insults anyone on my streets." And with that, he walked away, leaving the driver to pick up the pieces of his shattered pride. The young man, now humbled, muttered an apology to Eleanor before getting back in his car, driving off in silence. Matteo didn't look back. But for Eleanor, this moment would stay with her forever. After the confrontation with the young driver, Eleanor stood there for a moment, still processing what had just happened. The chill of the rain began to seep into her bones, but her heart was strangely warmed by Matteo's unexpected act of kindness. She had been humiliated, her dignity almost shattered, But the brief encounter with the Mafia boss had left her feeling a flicker of hope. It had been a long time since anyone had shown her respect like that. She glanced around at the people who had witnessed the exchange, still shocked by the events that unfolded. They had seen the powerful Mafia boss stand up for her, something she never expected. In her younger years, Eleanor had seen her fair share of men with power, but they had always ignored her, walked past her, and never given her a second glance. Now, someone with more power than anyone she had ever known had taken the time to defend her. Matteo Romano was not just any man. He was the boss of the most feared crime syndicate in the city. People whispered his name in the shadows, and his reach extended far beyond the streets. Yet, there he was, protecting a frail, elderly woman like her from a rude driver. Eleanor felt a rush of gratitude, mixed with a sense of disbelief. She slowly gathered her bags and began to walk away from the scene, her mind racing. She couldn't stop thinking about the man who had defended her. She knew she would never forget this moment. But as she walked, something else lingered in her mind. She had noticed something strange in Matteo's eyes when he looked at her. It wasn't just the usual cold detachment of a powerful man. It was something else. There was a hint of recognition, a flicker of something personal. Eleanor shook her head, wondering if she was imagining things. As she turned the corner to head back to her apartment, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She took it out, expecting to see a message from her son, but it was an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello," she said, her voice cautious. "Mrs. Eleanor," a voice on the other end asked. It was a deep, authoritative tone, one she recognized instantly. It was Matteo Romano. "Yes," Eleanor replied, her heart racing. "This is Matteo Romano," he said. "I hope you're doing well after the incident today." Eleanor was stunned. She hadn't expected to hear from him again. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied, still unsure of why he was calling. "I just wanted to make sure you're all right," Matteo continued. "You shouldn't have to go through something like that. If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to reach out." Eleanor was speechless. The last thing she expected was for Matteo Romano, a Mafia boss, to call her and offer help. I don't know what to say," she stammered, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. Matteo chuckled softly. "Don't worry about it. I don't do this for just anyone, Mrs. Eleanor. But you remind me of someone." Eleanor felt a shiver run down her spine. "Who?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Matteo paused before answering, his voice suddenly softer. "Someone I cared about a long time ago. Someone who never got the respect they deserved." Eleanor was silent for a moment, unsure of what to say next. She felt a strange connection, though she couldn't understand why. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice trembling. "I'll keep that in mind." Matteo didn't respond right away, but when he did, his tone had shifted. "Take care of yourself, Mrs. Eleanor," he said. "And remember, if anyone ever treats you like that again, let me know. I'll take care of it." With that, the call ended. Eleanor stood there, holding her phone, in a daze. She couldn't believe what had just happened. She had never expected such kindness from a man like Matteo Romano, and she couldn't help but wonder what kind of person he truly was. But one thing was certain, her life would never be the same again. From that moment on, she knew she would never forget the Mafia boss who defended her on a rainy afternoon, and she had no idea that this small act of kindness would set off a chain of events that would change everything. A week had passed since the day Matteo Romano, the feared Mafia boss, had defended Eleanor in front of the rude driver. It was a rainy morning again when Eleanor received another unexpected phone call. This time, however, it wasn't from Matteo. The voice on the other end was familiar, but it wasn't Matteo's. "Mrs. Eleanor," the voice said. It was a man, but he didn't identify himself. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. "Yes," she replied, cautiously. "This is Rocco, Mr. Romano's assistant," the man continued. "Mr. Romano would like to invite you to dinner this evening." Eleanor felt a lump form in her throat. A dinner with the Mafia boss? Was she hearing this right? She had never imagined that this day would come. "Dinner?" she repeated, her voice shaking slightly. "Yes, Mrs. Eleanor," Rocco replied. "Mr. Romano wants to speak with you, and he believes you might be able to help him with something. He insists that you join him tonight at 7 o'clock at his restaurant. The reservation is under your name." Eleanor felt a mix of emotions, confusion, anxiety, and curiosity. Why would a man like Matteo Romano want to speak with her? She had never done anything for him, let alone ask for help. She had been a quiet, invisible part of the city, doing what she had to survive. And yet, here she was, being invited by the Mafia boss himself. I don't know if I should, Eleanor said, her words hesitant. It's just dinner, Rocco said, his voice reassuring. Mr. Romano insists. He values your time and your presence. Please consider it an opportunity to speak with him. He respects you. Eleanor wasn't sure what to think, but the idea of meeting Matteo again, of understanding more about the man who had shown her such unexpected kindness, intrigued her. All right, she said finally. I'll come. That evening, Eleanor found herself standing in front of a luxurious restaurant, its grand entrance illuminated by golden lights. The marble steps seemed to lead her into another world, one that was foreign to her. She had never been inside a place like this, so polished, so refined. She hesitated for a moment, but then the thought of Matteo's unexpected offer pushed her forward. She took a deep breath and walked up the stairs, her heels clicking against the polished stone. Inside, the atmosphere was warm, intimate, and filled with quiet conversations. The restaurant was upscale, with chandeliers hanging from the ceiling and expensive-looking art adorning the walls. Rocco greeted her at the door, his expression kind but professional. Mrs. Eleanor, welcome, he said, guiding her to a private table in the back of the restaurant. Matteo was already there, sitting in the dim light, a glass of wine in front of him. He stood as she approached, offering a respectful nod. Please, sit, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Eleanor sat down, still unsure of what to expect. The man she had met just a week ago, the one who had stood up for her, was now looking at her with an intensity that made her feel both uncomfortable and oddly respected. Thank you for coming, Matteo said, his voice smooth and calm. I know this might seem strange to you, but I wanted to talk to you. Eleanor nodded, still silent. You don't know me, but I know a lot about you, Matteo continued, his eyes studying her carefully. I've seen how people treat you, how society ignores you. It's wrong. And when I saw you on the street that day, I couldn't help but feel that you deserved more than what life had given you. Eleanor blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected him to be so direct. I don't understand, she said quietly. Why would you care about someone like me? Matteo smiled slightly, his eyes softening. I've seen too many people like you in my life, he said. People who are overlooked, forgotten. But I see something in you, something that not many people do. He paused before continuing. I wanted to offer you a job. Eleanor's eyes widened. A job? From Matteo Romano? She wasn't sure if she was hearing him right. A job? She repeated. Yes, Matteo said, nodding. I want you to work with me. Not in the traditional sense. I need someone like you to help me with something important. It's a simple task, but one that requires someone who understands the value of quiet strength. You have that, Mrs. Eleanor. Eleanor was speechless. She had no idea what Matteo was talking about, but she couldn't deny the sincerity in his voice. And for the first time in her life, she felt as though she was being seen, truly seen, by someone with power. I don't know if I'm the right person, Eleanor said softly. Matteo leaned forward slightly. Trust me, he said. You are. And I'm offering you this because you've earned it. Eleanor sat back in her chair, still processing what Matteo was saying. This was a chance she could never have imagined, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to accept it. But one thing was clear, her life was about to change, and the man who had defended her on the streets was now offering her a path forward. Eleanor sat across from Matteo Romano, still trying to comprehend the weight of the offer he had placed before her. A job from the most feared and respected Mafia boss in the city. She felt like she was living someone else's life. The soft lighting inside the restaurant cast warm reflections across the table, illuminating Matteo's face in a way that made him look strangely human, not the untouchable figure that whispered rumors had painted him to be. She cleared her throat gently, her hands folded in her lap. She wanted to choose her words carefully. She was afraid that saying the wrong thing could shatter the fragile moment between them. Matteo watched her with the calm intensity of a man who was used to commanding rooms with silence alone. His presence was overwhelming, but not threatening, at least not toward her. Eleanor finally spoke. Mr. Romano, I am honored, truly, but I do not understand why you would want someone like me. I am old. I have no special skills. I do not know anything about business or whatever it is you do. Matteo's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained steady. Mrs. Eleanor, I am not asking you to run my business. I am asking you because you have something more valuable than most people in this room. His eyes narrowed in thought. You have lived a long time. You have seen things. You understand people. And most importantly, you understand dignity. Eleanor lowered her gaze for a moment. She had never been praised for anything like that before. She had lived her life quietly, working honest jobs, raising her family, caring for her husband, surviving hardships that no one ever saw. She had never thought that those invisible battles would matter to anyone else. You saw how that driver treated you, Matteo continued. He thought you were weak. He thought you were beneath him. People like that are everywhere in this city. People who think that power comes from money or status or loud voices. Then he leaned slightly forward, lowering his voice. But real power comes from character. And you have that. Eleanor felt a wave of emotion wash over her. Her eyes burned as she blinked slowly. She could not remember the last time anyone had acknowledged her worth, let alone a man with Matteo's influence. But before she could respond, a sudden commotion erupted near the entrance of the restaurant. The sound of raised voices, sharp and disrespectful, cut through the warm atmosphere like a cold knife. Matteo's expression hardened instantly. His eyes shifted from Eleanor to the entrance with a swiftness that told her he was already assessing the threat. Eleanor turned to look as well. A group of well-dressed men had entered, their expensive suits unable to hide their arrogant swagger. One of them, a tall man with a loud voice, was arguing with the hostess. His tone was filled with irritation, and he seemed intent on causing a scene. Matteo exhaled slowly, the calm before a storm. Rocco, standing nearby, stiffened in place as if awaiting an order. Who are they? Eleanor whispered. Matteo's eyes did not move from the scene. People who believe the world belongs to them, he said quietly. People who have forgotten respect. The tall man shoved past the hostess and approached the main dining area, loudly complaining about his reservation being moved. His voice echoed through the restaurant, dampening the once comfortable atmosphere. Several guests turned away uncomfortably. Eleanor felt herself growing tense as she watched the man berate the staff, each insult sharper than the last. The hostess, a young woman who could not have been older than 25 years, tried to apologize politely, but the man only grew louder, mocking her appearance and her job. Matteo's face darkened. His jaw clenched. His eyes narrowed into a dangerous glare. Eleanor could sense the shift in him, like the air before a thunderstorm. She remembered how he looked the day he defended her. That same cold fury was in him now, simmering beneath the surface. Without raising his voice, without making a scene, Matteo stood up from his seat. The restaurant seemed to fall into an uneasy silence. Eleanor watched, her heart tightening, knowing that the peaceful dinner they had shared was about to take a very different turn. As Matteo stood up from the table, Eleanor watched in stunned silence. The air in the restaurant had shifted, thickened with an unspoken tension. The man at the front of the restaurant, who had been causing the disturbance, was oblivious to the storm that was about to hit him. He continued to berate the hostess, demanding a table for his party without so much as a thank you. Matteo's calm demeanor never faltered, but there was a coldness in his eyes that Eleanor had seen only once before. The same coldness that had ignited his protective instinct when he defended her on the street. He walked slowly toward the tall man, his every step purposeful, like a predator closing in on its prey. The room seemed to grow quieter with every movement he made. The young man, still lost in his tirade, didn't see Matteo approaching him until he was standing right in front of him. For a moment, Matteo said nothing. He simply stood there, towering over the man, his presence filling the space between them. The tall man, noticing the Mafia boss for the first time, paused mid-sentence. His face flickered with a brief moment of realization, and then disbelief. Matteo's voice was low and steady when he finally spoke. "You've been rude to my staff," he said, his tone even, but laced with a warning. The tall man's smug expression faltered. "Excuse me," he said, clearly confused. "Do you have a problem with me?" Matteo took a small step closer, his presence becoming even more imposing. "I have a problem with people who think they are above others because they have money or power," he said, his voice carrying across the restaurant. Eleanor could feel the tension in the room grow thicker, as if everyone in the restaurant was holding their breath. Matteo's words cut through the air with a precision that made the man's arrogance seem small in comparison. The tall man looked around nervously, realizing that his outburst had caught the attention of not just Matteo, but the entire restaurant. "I didn't mean any harm," he said, trying to backpedal, his bravado quickly crumbling under Matteo's intense gaze. Matteo didn't give him a chance to finish. "It's too late for apologies," he said, his voice now a command. "I think you should leave." The tall man hesitated, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right words. But before he could say anything, Matteo turned his back on him and walked back toward Eleanor's table. The message was clear: this man had no power here. The tall man stood frozen for a moment, processing what had just happened. Then, with a look of complete defeat, he turned and walked out of the restaurant, his entourage following closely behind, no longer confident or self-assured. The restaurant returned to its previous state of uneasy silence, but the tension was gone. Eleanor sat there, still trying to absorb what she had just witnessed. Matteo had done more than just remove the man from the restaurant. He had stripped him of his pride, his sense of superiority. Eleanor's heart was racing. She had never seen anything like this before. She had never seen someone stand up for what was right in such an unapologetic, decisive way. The power Matteo possessed was unlike anything she had ever encountered, and yet, he had used it to defend her and the staff in the most public of ways. For a moment, Eleanor's mind wandered back to her earlier thoughts. How was it that someone like Matteo, a man with so much influence, had even noticed her? What had driven him to help her? She looked at him now, her thoughts swirling. Matteo caught her gaze, his expression softening slightly. "Are you all right?" he asked, his tone unexpectedly gentle. Eleanor nodded slowly, still in awe of everything that had just happened. She wasn't sure if she could find the right words to express how she felt, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life was no longer the same. Matteo had changed something within her. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, respected, and cared for. She didn't know where this unexpected connection would lead, but in that moment, she felt like she had found something precious, a spark of hope in a world that had often ignored her. As Matteo sat back down, Eleanor took a deep breath and tried to calm the racing thoughts in her head. This night had begun as an ordinary dinner invitation, but it was turning into something far more significant than she could have imagined. And as she sat there, across from the man who had come to her aid in her darkest moment, she couldn't help but wonder what other surprises awaited her in this strange new world he had introduced her to. After the confrontation with the arrogant man and his entourage, Eleanor felt a strange mix of emotions. Matteo had not only stood up for her, but had done so with a quiet authority that left her in awe. He was not like anyone she had ever met. She had lived a life of quiet service, always in the background, always unnoticed. But Matteo saw her. He valued her in a way she hadn't felt in years. As the night continued, the warmth from the dinner began to melt away the cool distance Eleanor had always kept between herself and the world. Matteo's presence was reassuring, yet it also made her feel vulnerable in a way she hadn't expected. They continued talking, small, easy conversation at first. Matteo asked about her life, her family, her history, and Eleanor, for the first time in a long while, found herself sharing details about her past. She spoke of her late husband, how they had struggled through life, how she had raised her children on her own. Matteo listened, his gaze never leaving her, as if he were carefully studying her every word. There was something in his eyes that she couldn't quite place. It was as though he was trying to see beneath the surface, to understand her in a way no one else ever had. As the night wore on, Eleanor realized that the dinner had taken a strange turn. It wasn't just an invitation from a powerful man. It was a turning point in her life. Matteo wasn't just offering her a job, as he had suggested earlier. He was offering her a chance at something more, something she had never imagined for herself. "You have a good heart, Mrs. Eleanor," Matteo said, his voice calm but earnest. "People like you, who have lived through hardship, they often have the most to offer. You understand what it means to care for others, to give without expecting anything in return. That is something rare in this world." Eleanor looked down at her hands, still clasped tightly in her lap. She wasn't sure how to respond. She had never been one to accept compliments easily, let alone from a man like Matteo. He was a world apart from the people she had known. Powerful, confident, surrounded by wealth and influence. "But I'm not like you," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't have your power or your wealth. I'm just an old woman, trying to make it through each day." Matteo's expression softened. He reached across the table and gently placed his hand over hers, his touch warm but firm. "You don't need to be like me, Eleanor. You don't need wealth or power. What you have is something far more valuable: your integrity, your kindness, and your ability to see beyond the surface. That's what matters most." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. She had never heard anyone speak to her like that. She had never been made to feel like she mattered, especially not by someone with the kind of influence Matteo held. She felt both humbled and empowered, as though a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had been lifted. Matteo leaned back in his chair and regarded her for a moment. "I don't expect you to make any decisions right away," he said. "But think about what I've offered. You don't have to work in the shadows anymore. I can help you find a place where your skills, your wisdom, your heart can truly make a difference." Eleanor didn't know what to say. She had spent her life in the background, always making sure others were taken care of, never asking for anything in return. But now, Matteo was offering her a chance to step into the light, to take her place at the table with the powerful. It was a tempting thought, one that both scared and excited her. "What would I be doing?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Matteo smiled, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "I need someone to help me with matters of trust," he said. "Someone who understands the value of loyalty, who can see through the masks people wear and know when they're hiding something. You've lived a life where you've had to trust people, sometimes blindly, and you've learned the hard way when that trust is broken. That's the kind of person I need by my side." Eleanor sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She had never thought of herself as someone who could help run a business, let alone be involved in the world of organized crime. But what Matteo was saying made sense. She had spent a lifetime reading people, understanding them, knowing when something wasn't quite right. She had made mistakes, of course, but she had learned to trust her instincts. Matteo was offering her a chance to use those instincts in a way that could change her life. As the dinner came to a close, Matteo stood up and offered his hand to Eleanor. "Take your time," he said, his voice gentle. "Think about what you want. And when you're ready, I'll be here." Eleanor hesitated for a moment before taking his hand. She didn't know where this would lead, but one thing was certain. Her life had just taken a turn she never expected. Days passed since the dinner with Matteo Romano, and Eleanor's life was still in a state of shock. What had begun as a simple act of kindness from a powerful man had turned into an offer she couldn't ignore. The opportunity he had presented to her was more than just a job. It was a chance to change everything. For the first time in a long while, she felt like her life had purpose beyond the routines of survival. But despite all the promises of a new future, Eleanor still had doubts. She wasn't sure if she was capable of stepping into a world that seemed so foreign, so far removed from everything she had known. How could someone like her, a woman who had spent her life in humble service, ever be trusted in a world of power and intrigue? She spent her days thinking about Matteo's words, his offer, and the life she had lived. Eleanor knew she couldn't ignore the call to something greater, but the fear of change kept her up at night. The fear of stepping into a world where power, loyalty, and respect were currencies she didn't fully understand. It was late one evening, when Eleanor was sitting at her small kitchen table, that the phone rang. The voice on the other end was familiar. It was Rocco, Matteo's assistant. "Mrs. Eleanor," Rocco said, his voice steady but professional. "Mr. Romano would like to meet with you tomorrow. It's important." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The moment when she would either step forward or walk away. "Tomorrow?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes," Rocco replied. "Please be at the restaurant by 6 p.m. Mr. Romano will be expecting you." The call ended, leaving Eleanor with a sense of foreboding. She had no idea what the meeting would entail, but she knew that it would change things once again. The next day, she spent hours preparing herself, not just physically but mentally. She had never dressed up for such an occasion before. She wasn't used to wearing anything other than practical clothing, worn shoes, a simple dress, and a cardigan. But today, she needed to look different. She needed to feel different. After hours of deliberation, she finally picked out a modest but elegant dress. She wasn't sure if it was the right choice, but it was all she had. As she stood in front of the mirror, fixing her hair and smoothing down the dress, she felt a wave of self-doubt wash over her. Was she really ready to walk into a world like Matteo's? Would he really trust her? What if she failed? The self-doubt was overwhelming, but she knew she couldn't turn back now. She had made her decision. At 6 o'clock sharp, Eleanor arrived at the restaurant. This time, the atmosphere felt different. There was no confusion, no hesitations. She had been here before, but now, walking into the establishment, she felt a sense of anticipation building up inside her. She was no longer just the invisible woman she had once been. Rocco greeted her at the door and led her to the back room, where Matteo was waiting. He stood up as she entered, his eyes immediately locking with hers. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said, his voice warm but purposeful. "I'm glad you came." Eleanor smiled faintly, still unsure of what to expect. She had spent days wondering about the next step, but now that she was here, all the uncertainty seemed to be fading into the background. Matteo gestured for her to sit down. The two of them exchanged small talk for a few moments, but Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. "You've thought about my offer, haven't you?" Matteo asked, his tone serious. Eleanor nodded. "I've thought about it a lot," she said quietly, "and I'm not sure if I'm the right person for this. I don't know if I can handle all of this." She gestured around the room, unsure of how to explain the depth of her uncertainty. Matteo looked at her for a long moment, his expression softening. "You're exactly the person I need," he said. "Not because you have experience with this world, but because you understand what really matters. You understand the value of loyalty, trust, and respect. These are qualities that can't be bought with money or power. You can't fake them. And that's why I'm asking you to join me." Eleanor was silent, her mind racing. She had never seen the world in such a way, and yet something in her told her that Matteo was right. She had lived her life by a code that had never been questioned. She knew what loyalty was, what respect was, because she had lived it every day. And in that moment, she realized that maybe this was her chance to make a difference. "What would you want me to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Matteo leaned forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "I want you to help me see things that others can't," he said. "I want you to help me understand who can be trusted and who can't. Your instincts have always been sharp, Mrs. Eleanor. I need someone like you by my side." Eleanor took a deep breath, her decision weighing heavily on her. She had spent so much of her life caring for others, but now, for the first time, someone was asking her to care for something greater than herself. And it felt right. She knew she was ready. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady, her heart full of both fear and excitement. Matteo smiled, a look of approval crossing his face. "I knew you would be," he said softly. "Welcome to the team, Mrs. Eleanor." After that fateful night in the restaurant, Eleanor was slowly coming to terms with her new reality. Matteo had given her a chance she had never even dreamed of. The world she now found herself in felt strange and unfamiliar, but she was beginning to understand the gravity of her decision. As part of Matteo's inner circle, she was no longer the invisible woman she had been all her life. The change in her was subtle at first, but it grew stronger with each passing day. Her confidence began to grow, and she found herself looking at the world around her in a different light. She was no longer just a spectator. She was part of something much bigger. Matteo, despite his ruthless reputation, had seen something in her. He had trusted her with tasks that others wouldn't even consider giving someone like her. Her role in his world was to observe, to listen, to understand. It wasn't a job of power or position, but one of influence. She became Matteo's eyes and ears in places where he couldn't be. Her first assignment was simple enough: attend a meeting with one of his associates, a man named Luca. He was a trusted member of Matteo's team, known for his loyalty and discretion. The task was to observe Luca's interactions with a potential business partner, a wealthy entrepreneur who had been trying to negotiate a deal with Matteo. The meeting was held at a lavish hotel in the city, and Eleanor was tasked with watching the exchange, noticing any subtle signs of deceit or dishonesty. At first, Eleanor had been nervous. She had never been involved in anything like this. She was used to cleaning, cooking, and serving, not analyzing business deals or understanding the intricacies of Mafia dealings. But as she sat in the hotel lobby, waiting for the meeting to begin, She realized that this was exactly what Matteo had seen in her. She didn't need to be part of that world to understand people. She had lived among them her whole life. She knew when someone was being truthful and when they were hiding something. The meeting was set to take place in a private room on the top floor of the hotel. Eleanor was ushered into the room quietly by Luca, who gave her a knowing glance before leaving to join Matteo's business partner. She remained at the back of the room, blending in with the shadows, her eyes focused on the conversation unfolding before her. The entrepreneur was a man in his 50s, sharp-dressed and confident, with a voice that could convince anyone of anything. He was discussing figures, investments, and profits, words that seemed to float over Eleanor's head. But as the conversation wore on, she noticed something. The man's eyes never left Luca's face when he spoke about certain numbers that seemed deliberately vague. His hand, when it reached for his glass, trembled slightly. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. She had seen this before: anxiety, avoidance. The signs were clear. The man was hiding something. As the meeting continued, Eleanor grew more convinced. There was a deal being made, but not the kind that Matteo would approve of. The entrepreneur was offering Luca a percentage of the deal, but he was doing so under the table, away from Matteo's sight. This was no simple business deal. It was a power grab. Matteo would not tolerate this betrayal. Eleanor watched carefully, making a mental note of every word, every gesture. When the meeting ended, she quietly exited the room behind Luca, who gave her a nod of approval. "Well done," he said quietly, his voice low. He didn't need to ask what she had seen. He could tell by the look on her face. Luca wasn't surprised. He had known from the beginning that Eleanor had a keen eye for detail. "We'll handle it," he added. "But remember, this is just the beginning. There are others who want to see Matteo fall." Eleanor nodded, her mind racing. She knew what she had to do now. She had to tell Matteo everything, before anyone else could betray him. The next evening, Eleanor found herself sitting in Matteo's office, a room she had come to know very well in the past few weeks. It was dark, quiet, and filled with the heavy scent of cigars. Matteo sat across from her, his eyes steady and expectant. "You've seen it," he said, his voice calm but intense. Eleanor took a deep breath and nodded. She told him everything she had seen: the entrepreneur's nervous gestures, the under-the-table deal, and the clear signs of betrayal. Matteo listened intently, not interrupting, his eyes sharp. When she finished, he sat back in his chair, his fingers tapping against the armrest. "Good work," he said, his voice colder now. "You've proven yourself. I'll take care of this." Eleanor felt a shiver run down her spine. She had never seen this side of Matteo before, the cold, calculating side that ruled his empire. And for the first time, she realized just how dangerous this world could be. She was no longer just a quiet observer. She was a part of it now. And as Matteo dismissed her from his office, Eleanor knew that her life would never be the same again. The days following Eleanor's meeting with Matteo had been filled with both anticipation and unease. The weight of the decision she had made hung heavy on her, but she had chosen to stay in Matteo's world, despite all the uncertainties. She had seen things, learned things, and now, she knew she was a part of something far greater than she had ever imagined. Matteo had promised her that he would take care of the entrepreneur who had tried to deceive him, and she trusted his word. But even as she trusted Matteo, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Life inside the walls of Matteo's world was far more complicated than she had ever expected. As the days passed, Eleanor found herself stepping deeper into a web of business dealings, silent alliances, and secrets that were carefully guarded. Her role had shifted from simple observer to trusted confidant, and though she had never anticipated such a change, she knew she couldn't turn back now. One evening, a week after her meeting with Matteo, she was summoned to his office. The air in the building was dense with tension, as if everyone knew something was coming, but no one was willing to say it out loud. Eleanor had grown accustomed to the quiet intensity of the office, but tonight, there was something different. Matteo's demeanor was colder than usual, his face unreadable. When she entered the room, he didn't immediately speak, instead motioning for her to sit. He was leaning back in his chair, his fingers drumming slowly on the desk. "There's been a development," he said, his voice low and steady. Eleanor sat up straighter, instinctively feeling that the calm exterior hid something dangerous. "What kind of development?" she asked, though she could guess the answer. The man you warned me about. The entrepreneur. He wasn't just after money, Matteo said, his eyes narrowing. This was a power play. He was trying to set me up, to take over some of my operations. I trusted him, and he betrayed that trust. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. She had known something was off, but she hadn't realized the scale of the betrayal. Matteo's voice softened, but his eyes still held the sharpness of a man who had been wronged. We've already taken care of the situation, but this isn't the end of it. Eleanor nodded, but she was still processing the gravity of what Matteo had said. He had made it clear that in his world, betrayal was not tolerated, and those who attempted it paid a heavy price. Who else is involved? She asked, her voice steady despite the storm of questions running through her mind. Matteo looked at her, his expression hardening. There are people who want to see me fail. They think I'm too powerful, too entrenched. They're making moves behind the scenes, trying to break my influence. I can't let them win. Eleanor's pulse quickened. She had never been this close to a battle of such magnitude before. Everything she had known, everything she had believed in, was now being tested. She wasn't just an observer anymore. She was a part of this world, whether she liked it or not. Matteo stood up and walked around his desk, stopping just in front of her. I need your help, Eleanor, he said, his tone serious. You've proven yourself. You've got the instincts I need. I'm going to need you to watch the people around me, to see who's loyal and who's not. This is going to get complicated, but I trust you. Eleanor felt the weight of his words settle on her shoulders. She had been watching, observing, and now, she was being asked to do more than just listen. She was being trusted with something far greater than she had ever imagined. Her heart raced as she processed the responsibility. I'm ready, she said quietly, the words feeling more certain than she had expected. Matteo's eyes softened slightly. I knew you would be. The tension in the room eased just a fraction, but Eleanor knew that what came next would be nothing like what she had faced before. As Matteo turned and walked back to his desk, she stayed where she was, absorbing the weight of her new role. The game had changed, and she was now a player in it. Matteo turned back to her, his expression still serious but tinged with something else. Respect, perhaps. You've already seen the lengths people will go to in this world, he said, his voice quiet. But I'm not asking you to play their game. I'm asking you to make sure we don't lose ours. Eleanor stood up slowly, feeling her resolve harden. She was no longer just an old woman trying to survive in the background. She was part of something bigger, and this time, she would be the one to ensure the game was played by her rules. She nodded to Matteo, her heart steady with the knowledge that her life, for better or worse, had changed forever. After Matteo's words, Eleanor knew that her life had shifted forever. The weight of her new role settled on her, but she was determined to prove herself. The trust Matteo had placed in her wasn't something she would take lightly. In the days that followed, she carefully observed the people in Matteo's world, his associates, his allies, and his enemies. She learned that there was much more to this world than business deals and money. It was about power, loyalty, and survival. As time passed, Eleanor was introduced to the inner workings of Matteo's empire. She sat in meetings with his closest confidants, listening and learning. She became a silent observer, taking in the subtle dynamics of the group, the glances exchanged, the power plays masked by polite conversation, and the calculated moves made behind closed doors. One afternoon, Matteo called Eleanor to his office. He had always been respectful toward her, but today, there was something different in his tone, an edge of urgency. Eleanor, he began, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that made her sit up straighter. There's been a problem. Eleanor's heart quickened. In this world, problems were never small, and they were never easily solved. What kind of problem? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear that crept into her chest. Matteo's eyes narrowed as he spoke. One of my most trusted men, Salvatore, has been selling information to my competitors. He's been leaking valuable intel to a rival group. I trusted him, but now he's betrayed that trust. Eleanor felt a chill run through her. Betrayal was not something Matteo took lightly. She had seen his calm demeanor slip only once before, and that was when he had dealt with the entrepreneur's treachery. But this felt personal. How do we handle this? Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Matteo stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city below. For a moment, Eleanor thought he wouldn't answer. But then, he turned back to her, his face cold and resolute. "We handle it swiftly," he said. "Salvatore is a liability now. He can't be trusted, and we can't afford to let him undermine everything we've built." Matteo's words hit Eleanor hard. She knew what that meant. In this world, there was only one way to deal with betrayal. "What do you need from me?" she asked, her heart pounding. Matteo studied her for a long moment before responding. "I need you to observe him. See how he behaves. See if he tries to make a move before I do. I need to know if he's planning to run or if he's planning something worse." Eleanor nodded, her mind racing. She knew that the task ahead of her was not going to be easy. She had to be discreet, careful, and watchful. She had to gain Salvatore's trust while also keeping an eye on his every move. The next few days were tense. Eleanor began to shadow Salvatore, watching his interactions with the other members of the organization. He was careful, almost too careful. He seemed to be walking a fine line between loyalty and treachery, and Eleanor could feel the weight of his every decision. Salvatore was a man who had built his reputation on trust, but now that trust was unraveling, and Eleanor was there to witness it. One evening, she followed him to a local bar. Salvatore was meeting with someone she didn't recognize. Eleanor remained at a distance, hiding in the shadows as she watched. She couldn't hear their conversation, but she could see the exchange of something. A briefcase, a handshake. It was enough to confirm what she had feared. Salvatore had gone too far. He was making a deal with the enemy. Eleanor's heart raced as she watched him leave the bar, his expression guarded. He wasn't planning to run. He was planning to betray Matteo in the worst way possible. She knew that the time had come to report back to Matteo. The next morning, Eleanor found herself back in Matteo's office, her hands trembling as she relayed everything she had seen. "He's meeting with the enemy," she said quietly, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "He's making deals behind your back, and he's planning to take you down." Matteo's face remained stoic, but Eleanor could see the muscles in his jaw tighten. He knew what had to be done. "I'll take care of it," he said, his voice dark and cold. "You did well, Eleanor. You've proven yourself more than I ever expected. Now, I'll make sure Salvatore never betrays me again." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat as she realized just how far Matteo was willing to go to protect what was his. She had seen the way he handled things, cold, calculated, and without mercy. She had no doubt that Salvatore's fate had already been sealed. And as Eleanor left Matteo's office, she couldn't shake the feeling that this world was more dangerous than she had ever imagined. She had made her choice, and now she was a part of it. The game had changed, and there was no turning back. The days following Eleanor's report on Salvatore had been tense, filled with anticipation for what Matteo would do next. She had done everything right, watched, listened, and reported, but the weight of the situation began to sink in. Matteo had been clear. Salvatore had to be dealt with swiftly. There was no room for betrayal in Matteo's world. Eleanor had known that when she entered this life, there would be no turning back. The next evening, Eleanor received a call from Rocco. "Meet me at the usual spot," he said, his voice low. "It's time." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The moment she had been dreading and anticipating all at once. She had no idea what "it's time" meant, but she knew it wasn't good. She had learned to read the undertones of Matteo's world, and this was a moment of finality. She arrived at the spot, an unassuming warehouse on the outskirts of town, just as the sun began to set. The building was old, weathered, and inconspicuous, standing against the backdrop of the city's sleek skyscrapers. Rocco was already there, waiting by the door. He didn't say anything as she approached, his face as stoic as ever. "Is it done?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely a whisper. Rocco nodded slowly, his eyes dark. "You'll see for yourself." He led her into the warehouse, where the air was thick with tension. The space was empty, save for a few crates and scattered tools. But in the center of the room stood Matteo, his back to them, his posture rigid. Salvatore was kneeling on the cold concrete floor, his hands bound behind him. Eleanor's stomach dropped. She had expected something harsh, but seeing it in person was different. Matteo turned around as they entered, his eyes locking onto hers. "You've seen the consequences of betrayal," Matteo said quietly, his voice low but firm. Eleanor could barely find her voice. "What happens now?" she asked, her breath catching in her throat. Matteo's gaze never left Salvatore. "Now we finish this." He turned to Rocco. "Take care of it." Rocco stepped forward, But before he could do anything, Salvatore spoke, his voice trembling with fear. "Please, Matteo," he begged. "I was just trying to survive. I never meant to cross you." Matteo's expression remained unchanged, his face a mask of cold determination. "Survival is no excuse for betrayal," he said flatly. "You knew the rules. You chose to break them. Now you pay the price." Eleanor stood there, watching the exchange, her heart pounding in her chest. She had seen the ruthlessness in Matteo before, but never this close, never so personal. Salvatore's fate had been sealed the moment he chose to deceive Matteo, but watching it unfold before her made everything more real, more visceral. As Rocco moved towards Salvatore, Eleanor's mind raced. She had thought that working with Matteo would be about business, about loyalty, but she hadn't fully understood the consequences that came with it. There was no room for weakness, no room for mercy. The world she had entered was a cold, unforgiving one. Rocco stopped in front of Salvatore, pausing for a brief moment before delivering the final blow. The sound echoed in the empty space, a harsh reminder of the price of betrayal. Eleanor felt a chill run through her as she turned away, her stomach twisting. She had witnessed a man's life come to an end, and there was no turning back from that. Matteo walked over to her, his steps measured and deliberate. "This is the reality of our world, Eleanor," he said, his voice low. "No one is above the rules, not even those who have served me well." Eleanor nodded slowly, her thoughts clouded. She had made a choice to be here, to be part of this world, but now she wondered if she had fully understood what that meant. She had seen the power Matteo wielded, but she hadn't yet experienced the toll it took on those who were part of his empire. As she left the warehouse that night, her mind was a swirl of conflicting emotions. She had helped make a crucial decision, one that would shape the future of Matteo's operation. But she was also beginning to understand the darker side of the life she had chosen. Matteo's world wasn't just about respect and loyalty. It was about control, power, and above all, survival. Eleanor wasn't sure if she was ready for all that it entailed, but she knew that, for better or worse, she was now deeply entrenched in it. The lines between right and wrong had blurred, and there was no going back. After the events at the warehouse, Eleanor found herself trapped between the world she knew and the new life Matteo had pulled her into. The cold finality of what she had witnessed haunted her in the quiet moments, but she couldn't afford to dwell on it for too long. Matteo's empire moved quickly, and with every passing day, Eleanor felt herself drawn deeper into its tangled web. She had always considered herself a survivor, but now she was starting to realize that surviving in this world required more than just grit. It required the ability to navigate its treacherous waters with a precision she wasn't sure she had. Days turned into weeks, and Eleanor's role in Matteo's operation continued to evolve. He trusted her, confided in her, and began to rely on her instincts more and more. She had proven herself valuable, and now, Matteo expected her to help him handle the most sensitive matters of his business. She had seen the way he handled his enemies, but what about his allies? It was a question that had been gnawing at her, and she was beginning to realize the truth. In Matteo's world, no one was truly safe. Trust was as fragile as glass, and even the people closest to him could turn at any moment. One evening, Matteo called Eleanor into his office. His expression was as unreadable as ever, but there was a hardness to his features that she hadn't seen before. "I need you to look into something for me," he said, his voice steady but carrying a weight that made her heart race. Eleanor nodded, her mind already working. She had learned to read Matteo's moods, and when he called for her help, it was always because something serious was at stake. "What is it?" she asked. Matteo leaned forward in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. "There's a leak," he said simply. "Someone in my inner circle has been feeding information to my competitors. I need to know who it is." Eleanor's stomach tightened. She had witnessed the consequences of betrayal firsthand, and she had no desire to see it happen again. "How do you want me to handle it?" she asked, her voice steady despite the rising tension in her chest. Matteo's eyes flickered for a moment, and then he spoke in a low, almost dangerous tone. "I need you to figure out who it is. Watch them, listen to them. Do whatever it takes to find out who's playing both sides." Eleanor nodded again, her thoughts racing. She knew what was at stake. This wasn't just about business. This was about survival. Matteo's empire depended on loyalty, and any crack in that foundation could bring it all crumbling down. Over the next few days, Eleanor carefully observed the people Matteo had entrusted with his empire. She watched their movements, listened to their conversations, and studied their behavior. There were subtle signs that one of them was hiding something, an offhand remark here, a glance exchanged there. Eleanor had learned to notice these small details, and she quickly began to piece them together. Her suspicions were confirmed when she overheard a conversation between two of Matteo's closest allies. They were talking in hushed tones, discussing a deal that didn't seem to involve Matteo at all. Eleanor's heart sank. The person who was betraying Matteo wasn't just a low-level associate. They were someone who had been with him from the beginning, someone who had earned his trust. She needed to tell Matteo what she had discovered, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about loyalty anymore. This was personal. As she made her way to Matteo's office, she couldn't help but wonder how far he was willing to go to protect his empire. She had seen him handle betrayal with cold efficiency before, but what if this time, the person responsible was someone he trusted, someone he had considered a friend? When she arrived at his office, Matteo was sitting at his desk, the same unreadable expression on his face. He didn't look up as she entered. "I've found something," Eleanor said, her voice steady but tinged with unease. Matteo looked up at her, his gaze sharp. "What have you found?" Eleanor took a deep breath before speaking. "It's one of your closest allies," she said quietly. "They've been feeding information to your competitors. I overheard them talking." Matteo's expression didn't change, but Eleanor could see the tension building in his jaw. "Who?" he asked, his voice low, almost a growl. Eleanor hesitated for a moment before answering. "It's Vincenzo," she said, the name slipping out before she could stop it. Matteo's eyes hardened instantly. Vincenzo had been with him from the beginning, a trusted member of his inner circle. If what Eleanor had heard was true, this was a betrayal that cut deeper than any other. "Are you sure?" Matteo asked, his voice cold. Eleanor nodded. "I'm sure," she said. "I heard them talking about a deal they were making behind your back." Matteo stood up slowly, his expression darkening. "Vincenzo has always been loyal," he said quietly, almost to himself. "But loyalty can be bought, and trust can be broken." He turned toward the window, his silhouette outlined by the fading light of the evening. Eleanor could feel the tension in the air, the heaviness of the decision that lay before him. She had seen how Matteo dealt with betrayal before, but this time felt different. This time, the betrayal came from someone who had been like family. Matteo turned back to her, his face resolute. "Thank you, Eleanor," he said softly. "You've done well." Eleanor didn't know how to respond. She had done what he had asked of her, but now, she was beginning to understand the true cost of loyalty in Matteo's world. He had built an empire on trust, but in the end, trust was the one thing that could destroy it. The days following Eleanor's discovery about Vincenzo had been heavy with tension. Matteo had made his decision clear. Salvatore had already paid the price for his betrayal, but Vincenzo's case was different. He wasn't just another ally. He was family. This wasn't just business. It was personal. Matteo had trusted him for years. He had considered him more than just a colleague. Vincenzo had been a brother, and the idea that he could betray him was a bitter pill to swallow. Eleanor had expected a swift decision, but Matteo took his time. He spent hours in his office, thinking, weighing the cost of the betrayal. Eleanor knew better than to push him. She had learned that patience was essential in this world. The following evening, Matteo called her into his office once again. This time, his voice was calm, his demeanor collected. He motioned for her to sit across from him, but this time, there was something different in the air. The gravity of the situation had shifted. "I've decided what to do with Vincenzo," Matteo said, his voice steady but tinged with an underlying tension. Eleanor didn't respond immediately, waiting for him to continue. "He's been loyal for years, Eleanor," Matteo said quietly. "But loyalty is a fragile thing. It's not a permanent bond. And once broken, it's not easily repaired." He paused as if choosing his next words carefully. "I'll deal with him personally," he added. Eleanor nodded, sensing that Matteo's resolve was final. She had seen the way he dealt with betrayal, and this time, she knew it would be no different. Vincenzo's fate had been sealed the moment he chose to cross Matteo. Eleanor's heart ached as she thought of the man who had once stood beside Matteo, someone she had come to respect over time. But she also knew that there was no room for weakness in this world. Loyalty was everything. Matteo stood up, walking over to the window as he gazed out at the city below. Eleanor stayed seated, feeling the weight of the moment. She had been a part of this world for a while now, but with every passing day, the stakes seemed higher. Matteo turned back toward her, his eyes cold and focused. "I need you to be ready, Eleanor," he said. "This world doesn't stop for anyone. People will always try to test you, to see if they can break you. The moment you show weakness, you become a target." Eleanor nodded. She had seen what happened to those who failed to meet the standards of this life. The consequences were not just physical, they were psychological, and the mental toll was even worse. Matteo's empire was built on strength, and the only way to stay in it was to keep moving forward, no matter the cost. "I understand," Eleanor said quietly. Matteo walked back to his desk and picked up a piece of paper, his fingers grazing the edges as he read over the notes in front of him. "Vincenzo will face the consequences of his actions, but I'm not going to let this break me. It's just another lesson," Matteo said, almost to himself. Eleanor could see the weight of those words on him. This wasn't just business, it was his life, his legacy, and Vincenzo's betrayal had shaken him to his core. But despite everything, Matteo remained unbroken. "I've built this empire, Eleanor," he said, his voice firm, "and I won't let anyone destroy it, not even from the inside." Eleanor could feel the conviction in his words. There was no room for compromise in Matteo's world. He had built everything he had from the ground up, and he would protect it at all costs. She wasn't sure how much more of this world she could take, but she had made her choice. She had committed herself to him, to the empire he had created, and now, there was no turning back. Later that night, Eleanor watched as Matteo met with Vincenzo. She didn't hear the conversation, but the tension in the room was palpable. When Vincenzo left, his head bowed low, his face a mask of regret, Eleanor knew that the matter had been settled. She didn't need to ask what had happened. The consequences of betrayal had been swift and final. In Matteo's world, there was no room for weakness, no space for second chances. Betrayal was met with a price, and Vincenzo had paid it. As Eleanor left the office that night, she felt a strange sense of finality settle over her. She had seen the darkness in Matteo's world, the ruthless efficiency with which he dealt with those who crossed him. She had seen it firsthand, and though it unsettled her, she understood it. This was the reality of the life she had chosen. The game was always changing, and in order to survive, you had to keep up, no matter the cost. Matteo had made sure of that, and now, Eleanor was fully a part of it. She wasn't just the quiet observer anymore. She was a player in this world, and she was learning to navigate it with every step she took.